Hey guys, welcome to Mr. Valentin's YouTube video for A Christmas Carol Stave Four. This is your overbreak assignment, which is to listen to this video and read the chapter. Notes are posted on the homework website, so make sure you download the V-Notes and review them as we go along. Have your book ready. If you lost your book, on the homework website is the full text, so you can follow along there while listening to the video. At times I will stop and let you read for moments by yourself. And yeah, so there's that. So let's do a quick review. First up, some important literary terms that will make their presence in this chapter. First up, personification. Remember, personification is giving lifelike qualities to non-living or non-human things. Kennings, which we haven't seen in a while, is a two-word poetic renaming of someone or something. A conceit is a comparison that is abstract in concept. So it's like a simile or a metaphor, but it's more complicated than that. So someone might make a comparison to, you're as beautiful as a flower. Well, that's a simile, because there's no abstractness. We get it. Flowers are associated with beautifulness, so if you're saying you're as beautiful as a flower is beautiful. But if you say something like, you are like a brick house, we don't know what a brick house is. It could be strong, it could be big, it could be red. Alright, it's slightly confusing, it's abstract. So we've seen conceits in this story where they make a comparison to a lobster in the bottom of a cellar. So we see things like that. Catharsis, right, is the purging and redemption of emotions. And finally, we are in the denouement, which is the events leading to the resolution. Our plot diagram is as important as ever. The beginning part of our story, this right here, is called the Exposition. The dotted line going diagonal up is what we call the inciting incident. This line going up is the complication. At the very top, we have the climax. Going down, we have the denouement, which is what we're in now. And finally, at the very end, we have the resolution. Very nicely our story structured. Alright, exposition is where we meet Scrooge. We find out the location. The inciting incident is Jacob Marley says Scrooge will be visited by 3 ghosts. The complication is the first ghost. The climax is the second ghost. The denouement is the last ghost, which is the scene we're in now. And the resolution is the after effects. So opening up your text to the beginning of Chapter 4, Stave Four, the last of the 3 spirits. Let's begin. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee. For in the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. So, I started with this right here, this nice little caption, which I thought kind of gave that description. We have this picture, the one outstretched hand. You cannot see its face. It's covered in gloom and mysteriousness. What we see in this scene is a strong establishment of the tone. Right? The tone is the mood of the story, and we can get that the mood in this last scene is kind of creepy. Note that the ghost doesn't speak, which is important for its characterization. So Scrooge begins. "I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come," said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. "You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us," Scrooge pursued. "Is that so, spirit?" The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its fold, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape, so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused for a moment, as if observing his condition, and giving him time to recover. So, in this scene, all right, we get this creepiness that the ghost, again, does not speak. He just kind of nods his head, all right, and points. Which is creepy in and of itself. Continuing on. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him, while he, though he stretched his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black. "Ghost of the future," Scrooge exclaimed, "I fear you more than any spectre I have seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. "Lead on," said Scrooge, "lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit." So in this moment, again, all right, we see this ghost not responding, but Scrooge is willing to learn. Right? He wants to go with this ghost. And so he's excited about the prospects, about learning, about gaining knowledge. And we saw this with the Ghost of Christmas Present. With the Ghost of Christmas Past, he was more reserved. But by now, largely, I think we could call Scrooge a changed man. So I'm going to pause. All right. You're going to read to the beginning of the paragraph that says, "He knew these men also perfectly." So read to that, and we'll begin there. Beginning. "He knew these men also perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy, and of great importance. He had made a point always of standing well in their esteem in a business point of view, that is, strictly in a business point of view. "How are you?" said one. "How are you?" returned the other. "Well," said the first, "Old Scratch got his own at last, hey?" "So I'm told," returned the second. "Cold, isn't it? Seasonable for Christmas time. You are not a skater, I suppose?" "No, no, something else to think of. Good morning." Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. So we're introduced to these several businessmen, all right? And notice what happens in the conversation with these businessmen. They're talking about, all right, a dead person. This dead person is obviously Scrooge. And the fact that he's dead, it doesn't bother them. Not at all. So we see this kind of oddness about all these different businessmen. Continuing on. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial, but feeling assured that they must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. They could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was the past, and this ghost's province was the future. Nor could he think of any one immediately connected with himself to whom he could apply them, but nothing doubting that, to whomsoever they applied, they had some latent moral for his own improvement. He resolved to treasure up every word he heard and everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadow of himself when it appeared, for he had an expectation that the conduct of his future self would give him the clue he missed, and would render the solution of these riddles easy. So Scrooge notes that in this vision, all right, we are in the future. But Scrooge doesn't realize that the dead person they're talking about is him. So it's a slightly confusing moment for Scrooge. He doesn't know what value there is in any of this. Continuing on. He looked about in that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner. And though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and thought and hoped he saw his newborn resolutions carried out in this. Quiet and dark beside him stood the phantom with its outstretched hand. When he roused himself for his thoughtful quest, he fancied from the turn of his hand and its situations in referencing to himself that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly. It made him shudder and feel very cold. So Scrooge is walking around the city and he doesn't see himself. Now he doesn't realize that the dead person they're talking about is him. He just thinks that maybe he's changed into a better person. But, as a matter of fact, that's not the case in this future. In this future, Scrooge is dead because Scrooge was a terrible person. And you have to think, if you act a terrible person your whole life, at what point do people stop trusting you or listening to you? They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly, alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offenses of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery. So, right after this, alright, Scrooge enters the seedy part of town. And obviously this is all leading to something much grander. So you're going to pause the video. You're going to read about the pawn shop. A pawn shop is a place where they buy and sell used goods. It's usually associated with seediness and dirtiness and disgust and crime and filth. So we're going to go there. So you're going to read to the point where it says Mrs. Dilber was next. So read to Mrs. Dilber was next, and we'll catch up there. In this picture, I have 3 people who would presumably represent these 3 seedy people who are selling to the pawn shop, although this pawn shop looks kind of nice with its pretty safe, but generally considered really dirty and nasty. So, Mrs. Dilbert was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. So, written on the wall, although not on this wall, alright, would be people's, value. So, they might have something that says, Mrs. Dilbert, and how much money she has, whatever it is, $7. That's a lot of money for the time. So I doubt she had $7. Alright, so Mrs. Dilber has some things she wants to sell. Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashions, silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. I always give too much to the ladies. It's a weakness of mine. That's the way I ruined myself, said old Joe. That's your account. If you asked me for another penny and made it open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown. And now undo my bundle, Joe, said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large, heavy roll of some dark stuff. What do you call this? Said Joe. Bed curtains? Ah, returned the woman, laughing and leaning forward on her crossed arms. Bed curtains. You don't mean to say you took 'em down, rings and all, with him lying there, said Joe. Yes, I do, replied the woman. Why not? You were born to make your fortune, said Joe, and you'll certainly do it. I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching it out, for the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe, returned the woman coolly. Don't drop that oil upon his blankets now. His blankets? Asked Joe. Whose else do you think? Replied the woman. He isn't likely to take cold without 'em, I dare say. I hope he didn't die of anything catching, said old Joe, stopping in his work and looking up. Don't be afraid of that, returned the woman. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things if he did. Ah, you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one, too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me. So this woman, alright, let me move that. This woman steals dead Scrooge's property. Again, Scrooge at this point doesn't realize that the person they're talking about is Scrooge. Alright, so they steal Scrooge's property, bed curtains, blankets, etc., shirts, towels, all these different garments that will get them money. So clearly these are corrupt individuals, but it says something about who Scrooge was that people are willing to steal his stuff after he's dead. Clearly, Scrooge is viewed as a miserable individual. Almost like he deserves to have his stuff stolen, according to these people. Continuing on. What do you call wasting of it? Asked old Joe. "Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure," replied the woman with a laugh. "Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it isn't good enough for anything. It's quite as becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one." Scrooge listened to the dialogue in horror, as they sat grouped about their spoil in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp. He viewed them with a detestation and disgust, which could hardly have been greater, though they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself. "Ha ha!" laughed the same woman, when old Joe, producing a flannel bag with money in it, told out their several gains upon the ground. "This is the end of it, you see. He frightened every one away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead. Ha ha!" So, in Scrooge's death, there's profit for other people. "Spirit," said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?" He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay a something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. So, Scrooge thinks that the dead person that they stole these things from might be someone like himself. What Scrooge doesn't realize is that this dead person is Scrooge. So we're transformed into this other room. If you could read to the paragraph, this is a couple pages in, where it says, "The ghost conducted him through several streets." So read a couple pages till "the ghost conducted him through several streets," and we arrive at Bob Cratchit's house. Beginning. "The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and, as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet. Very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing. But surely they were very quiet. So, in this scene, the narrator notes, that the Cratchit family is quiet. That something's different on this future. "And he took a child and set him in the midst of them." Where had Scrooge heard these words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face. "The color hurts my eyes," she said. "The color, ah, poor Tiny Tim." "They're better now again," said Cratchit's wife. "It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time." "Past it, rather," Peter answered, shutting up his book. "But I think he has walked a little slower than he used these few last evenings, mother." So we're finding out that Bob is physically affected by the death of Tiny Tim. So in this scene, we're finding out Tiny Tim is dead, that life for the Cratchit family is harder than ever, and that Bob is physically slower and sadder. They were very quiet again. At last she said, and in a steady, cheerful voice that only faltered once, and this is Mrs. Cratchit speaking, I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulders very fast indeed." "And so have I," cried Peter. "Often." "And so have I," exclaimed another. So had all. "But he was very light to carry," she resumed, intent upon her work. "And his father loved him, so that it was no trouble, and there is your father at the door." So, the famous scene is always that Bob used to carry Tiny Tim. And the irony of the situation is that now that Tiny Tim is dead, it's harder for him to walk without him. So there's this sadness that lurks. She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob and his comforter. He had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, father. Don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and spread of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said. "Sunday? You went today, then, Robert?" said his wife. So Scrooge went and visited Tiny Tim's grave, we find out. So, we're going to read till the part where it says, "The spirit stood among the graves, and were transported to the graveyard." So this is a couple pages in. And again, "The spirit stood among the graves, and pointed down to one." The spirit stood among the graves, and pointed down to one. He advanced toward it, trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw a new meaning in its seldom shape. "Before I draw near to that stone to which you point," said Scrooge, "answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they shadows of the things that may be only?" So Scrooge wants to know if he can change the way things are supposed to be. Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. "Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if persevered in, they must lead," said Scrooge. "But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it thus with what you show me." The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept toward it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave of his own, Ebenezer Scrooge. "Am I that man who lay upon the bed?" he cried upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again. "No, spirit. Oh, no, no." The finger was there. "Spirit," he cried, tight clutching at its robe, "hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. But for this intercourse, why show me this if I am past all hope?" For the first time the hand appeared to shake. So Ebenezer is pleading with the ghost, saying he's a changed man. He's learned from his mistakes, not just now, but through the whole course of the story. "Good spirit," he pursued, as down upon the ground he fell before it, "your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life." The kind hand trembled. "I will honor Christmas in my heart, and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone." So we see a bit of personification there, that he's going to live in the capitalized past, present, and future. In his agony he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. So the scene ends with Scrooge kind of falling down, and then all of a sudden he's back in his bedroom. And that's the end of Stave Four. So thanks for listening. And be sure to download the V-Notes, print them, make sure you're following along, know every part. All right. Inevitably, when there's the test, all right, you're going to want each section of notes and have them available, so that way you can read them and know what occurred in the exposition, what occurred in the complication, climax, denouement, and inevitably the resolution.